بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم لا علم إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت الحكيم العليم. اللهم افتح علينا حكمتك وانشر علينا رحمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. اللهم افتح علينا حكمتك وانشر علينا رحمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. اللهم افتح علينا حكمتك وانشر علينا رحمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. وصلى الله على سيدنا وحبيبنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم خير العرب والعجم والأنام، وعلى آله وصحابته ومن تبعهم بإحسان. الحمد لله. I want to say first off that the topic is daunting, to say the least. I certainly don't claim in any way to have all of the answers. It's something that I've certainly given a lot of thought. And I was thinking on the way on the airplane actually that I really in a sense don't have anything to add to this discourse that's original, because this condition that we find ourselves in, which is in a sense exacerbated in the present times for a number of reasons, is nonetheless a condition that this ummah has been in for quite some time. And some far more scholarly and more intelligent people than myself or others have looked at it and considered it quite deeply, written several books, and many talks given, many lectures, and yet the process goes on and continues. And as I was thinking that, the ayah in the Quran came to me. I looked out the window actually. وَذَكِّرْ فَإِنَّ الذِّكْرَ تَنْفَعُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Remind people because the reminder benefits the people of Iman. And so in a sense, we have nothing to offer anymore in terms of the discourse, the people speaking in this age, other than reminders, in the hopes that ourselves and that others will begin to heed the reminders. And this is the purpose of dhikr, that we remember. If you look at the title about understanding the past, looking at the present condition, and attempting to look at some possible ways of change for the future, the first thing that I'd like to point out is that I want to use a medical model. It's useful, I think it's Quranic, because the Quran says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, قَدْ جَاءَتْكُمْ مَوْعِظَةٌ مِّن رَبِّكُمْ. This Quran has come down as a mu'idah, an exhortation, and Allah says that it is a rahmah, it's a mercy, and it's a shifa, it's a healing. It's a shifa lima fi sudur, for what's in the breast of diseases and illnesses. And so the language of medicine is the language of the Quran and the prophets. Now when you look at a disease or an illness, there are certain things that you have to examine first. You have to look at the nature of the illness. What is its characteristics? And illnesses have many different aspects. One of them is in medical tradition, you look at what are called signs and symptoms. Now a sign, generally, there's probably people in here that are studying medicine or maybe doctors or nurses or people in that medical profession. But a sign is something that is objective, that the one observing can see it. And a good physician is the one who learns to literally see signs that lesser physicians don't see. In other words, they see things that the average person doesn't see. So a sign is an objective outward manifestation. Or it could be an inward now, because we use very sophisticated ways of measuring blood and cells and these types of things. Then there's also what's called a symptom. And a symptom is something that is articulated by the patient. The patient tells the physician what's wrong. I have a pain here. Well, what kind of pain? It's a sharp pain, because I can't tell that. If I'm taking a case history, I can't tell that it's a sharp pain. That has to be told to me, and that's a symptom. The sign is that there's swelling, that it's red. Those are signs we can see outwardly. So we have to know the nature, its signs and its symptoms. And then we have to know the cause. What is the cause of the problem? The illness itself has a cause. And this is called etiology, trying to understand where does this disease come from. Now when you look etiologically at an illness, you have different aspects of it. You have what they call causa profundus, a very deep, profound cause. You have causa occasionalis, an occasional cause. For instance, somebody could have asthma, but it's a stress that suddenly brings it on. You see, that's not the cause of the disease. That's simply an occasional cause. It's something that emerges and actually wakes up a sleeping illness. Right? And this is something that stress does. So you have superficial causes and you have deep causes. Now, if you look in the world, the vast majority of what we read in newspapers, what we read in magazines are very superficial causes. If they're causes at all, they generally tend to be signs and symptoms. And this culture is brilliant at articulating signs and symptoms, and yet they have not a clue as to the cause, the underlying diseases that are affecting humanity, that are afflicting humanity in any time and place. They have no understanding whatsoever because they know the outward of this world. يَعْلَمُونَ ظَاهِرًا مِنَ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا وَهُمْ عَنِ الْآخِرَةِ هُمْ غَافِلُونَ. They know the outward of this world. They can elicit the signs. But they do not know the inward. They don't know the cause. And the greatest cause of all things is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they're the furthest from knowing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is ultimately the only cause, that everything else in fact is means. So we have to look at the cause, and it has superficial aspects, but we have to look also deeply at it. And then we have to understand the prognosis, which is, what does this mean generally? Because the Quran is filled with prognosis. How does it tell us the prognosis? By looking at the ancients, by showing us the same signs and symptoms, telling us what the cause was, and then saying, if you get the same disease that they had, then you have the same prognosis that they had. And this is again and again in the Quranic narrative. It comes again and again. We see the same afflictions. They don't come with anything new. I guarantee you, read the Quran, look at the people that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala destroyed. They come with nothing new. The same old game. The people playing today are the same players. They change the names, but they're the same players. We have our archetypes, and I'm going to talk, inshallah, about the archetype of Qarun because he's a fascinating Quranic archetype. Allah doesn't tell us about these people to tell us about some story that happened in the past. When Abu Dharr radiallahu anhu was reminding Muawiyah radiallahu anhu about the people that were hoarding gold, and he quoted the ayah, الَّذِينَ يَكْنِزُونَ الذَّهَبَ وَالْفِضَّةَ, those who are hoarding gold and silver. Muawiyah radiallahu anhu said, نزلت في أهل الكتاب يا أبا ذر. That ayah was revealed in the people of the book. He said, نزلت فيهم عبرة لنا. It was revealed about them as a way of taking a lesson. وَالسَّعِيدُ مِنَ التَّعِظَ بِغَيْرِهِ. The felicitous one is the one who takes heed from the afflictions of others so that he doesn't fall into the same afflictions. So we have to look at how then do we prognosticate, how then do we predict, according to the Quranic grid, where we are headed if we don't change our ways. And this is very important. Now, not only a prognosis, there are two types of prognosis. There's a prognosis if you don't take a cure. Here's what generally will happen. This is what the doctor says. But there's another prognosis, and that is if you take the cure. Now the difference between their medicine and the Quranic medicine, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ. This is a book, there's no doubt. In their medicine, it's conjecture. 95 out of the statistical studies that we've taken, 95% of the people that do this treatment get better. Well, what if you're in that 5%? You're not in 5%. It's 100% for you that you didn't get better, right? So their science is not exact. It's based on conjecture. It's based on a type of kahana, what the Quran calls kahana, really. And also on hukm al-'ada, which is making a judgment based on repetitive events and occurrences. Now, to look at understanding the past, where do we go? The first thing in understanding the past, there are two types of pasts that we can examine. I'm sure there's others, but these are the ones I'm concentrating on. The two types, there's understanding spiritually what took place in the past and understanding material what took place in the past materially. If we look at the matter from a spiritual point of view, or, and I would have a slash there, unseen, al-ghayb. In trying to understand the past, we have to understand what are the spiritual and the unseen influences that are involved in the history of the human being. Because these are real. The materialist denies them. He says there's nothing other than the material world. And some of them, like Hume or Kant, they say there might be other things, but we can't know them. The only thing we can know is the material world, and therefore we're cut off from it. And this is Kant's whole critique of the ability of the human being, of reason itself as a way of understanding the supra-phenomenal world, the noumena, or the world that goes beyond this stuff here. We can't understand it. It's impossible. So we cannot know metaphysics. In the end, what's beyond this natural world, it's not worth studying anymore, and now we move into deep material sciences. And so the pursuit of man in the Western world, which is very different from the Muslim world, and inshallah I'll try to get to that. The pursuit of the Western man, because again, in understanding our past, there are two pasts now that we really have to understand. We have to understand the past of the Ahlul Kitab, and we have to understand the past of the people of Islam. Because the other players in this global scene are really, when we look at them historically, they do not have the same impact on Islam that the Ahlul Kitab have. Al-Yahud wal-Nasara. And when the Prophet ﷺ said, لَتَتَّبِعِنَّ سَنَنَ الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ شِبْرًا بِشِبْرٍ ذِرَاعًا بِذِرَاعٍ حَتَّى لَوْ سَرَكُوا جُحْرَ ضَبٍّ لَسَرَكْتُمُوهُ قالوا اليهود والنصارى استفهاما استغرابا اليهود والنصارى يا رسول الله من القوم إلا هؤلاء. You will follow those who went before you, the ways they went, hand span by hand span, arm's length by arm length, to the point if they go down the lizard's hole, you'll go down the lizard's hole as well. And in a riwayah in the Mishkat, حتى لو كان منهم من أتى أمه علانية لكان من أمتي من فعل ذلك أو كما. Even if there was one of them that went to his mother sexually, there would be somebody from my ummah that imitated them in that. وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ. Now the Prophet ﷺ مَا يَنْطَقُ عَنِ الْهَوَى. He does not speak from passion. When they asked him, will we follow the Jews and the Christians, Ya Rasulullah? He said, who are the people? Men and nas. Who are the ummah? Who are the nations? Who are the civilizations other than those people? In other words, not that there weren't other civilizations. There were, and the Prophet ﷺ was aware of that. There were the Dravidians, the Hindu Kush, the Chinese, the Confucianist culture, the Japanese culture. But we're talking about the impact. Who is being imitated today? The Jew and the Christian. Nobody's imitating the Japanese. People aren't walking around dressed like samurais. They're wearing jeans and t-shirts and cowboy and baseball caps. When the Chinese president came here, that's what he did. He put on the cowboy hats and went to the hoedown, right? Not like Ho is a Chinese name. That's hoedown is what they do in Texas or something like that. That's what he did. You see, he comes and you look It's amazing, it's interesting, because in the pictures that they showed in the magazine, his wife, because China is still a deeply conservative culture. And when you see Hillary Clinton next to his wife is what these people would call a wallflower. Is a non-entity. There's no personality being expressed. And next to her is this woman glamorously turning 50, right? They worked very hard at it. So people aren't imitating these people. They're imitating these people here, the Europeans and the Americans, and in particular the Americans, which is a very interesting phenomenon. So we have outwardly, when we look at attempting to understand the past, there are two pasts going on that we have to be concerned with as Muslims, as attempting to analyze and understand the age we're living in, because we cannot be ignorant of our age. Sidi Ahmed Zarruq mentioned in his Qawa'id that in the Suhuf of Ibrahim, the Prophet ﷺ was quoted as saying in the Suhuf of Ibrahim, one of the wisdoms that Ibrahim ﷺ was given was عَلَى الْمَرْءِ أَنْ يَكُونَ عَارِفًا بِزَمَانِهِ مُمْسِكًا مِنْ لِسَانِهِ مُقْبِلًا عَلَى شَأْنِهِ, that it is incumbent upon an individual to know the age that he is living in, to take hold of his tongue, because that's the milak. That's the thing that will allow you to possess all of good in Islam, is to hold your tongue. And then to get on with what is your business. The Prophet ﷺ said, مِنْ حُسْنِ إِسْلَامِ الْمَرْءِ تَرْكُهُ مَا لَا يَعْنِيهِ. From the good Islam of an individual is that he leaves what is not any concern to him. So, in understanding this past, we have to know the Muslim past and the European and American past also. And I can't do that for you. You have to do your homework. The Muslims have to look, and they have to look in an intelligent way, in a sophisticated way, not in these simplistic ways that we've been given to looking at things for some time, looking at superficial causes, talking about the superiority of technology, as this is some cause in which the Muslims are defeated. Subhanallah. If there's anybody in this auditorium that still believes that, they haven't read the Quran. And if they've read it, they have not understood it. Because the Muslims have never been defeated because of udda or adad. They're never defeated because of udda or adad. And it's very interesting to note, many people don't know this, but between the period of 1920, the early 20s to about 1938, there was active resistance against the French in Morocco. Abdul Karim al-Rifi, Jazahullahu khairan wa rahimahullah, one of the great mujahids of this century, killed 3 times as many French, his people, his army, during that period than were killed in World War I. People don't know that. They don't know that the Muslims were putting up a resistance. Now, there are causes that have to be understood. We have to understand what they are in a deep way, so we have to look at history, because history explains many things to us. Now, if you look at, and you can understand it at an archetypal level, you can really do without history if you have a deep and profound understanding of the Quran. I guarantee you. If you have a deep and profound understanding of the Quran, because Quran is history at its archetypal level. It is history that is constantly repeating itself. And by archetype, I don't mean it I'm really using it idiosyncratically. I mean it simply that it is explaining to us human phenomena. So we can see the pattern repeated again and again. We can see Musa and Fir'aun and see that struggle with all of the prophets and the oppressors. We can see that struggle again and again, and that's why it's repeated so many times in the Quran. So at looking now to look at some spiritual and material forces, we can go back to the first and primary concerns, which takes you to the Quranic narrative in understanding what goes wrong right from the very beginning. Because the Quranic narrative is very powerful in that Adam alayhi salam his wife Hawa, and Shaitan are three, they are the three important creative figures that must be understood in the Quran. We believe that they existed, that they are real, and that the story is not a mythology, it's not a narrative. Adam alayhi salam is created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from water and clay, as we all know, which modern science has added nothing to that statement. Nothing whatsoever. Modern science has added nothing to that statement, because you can take apart this human creature and you will find water and earth. That is what we're made out of. From it we came and to it we return. That's reality. So the Quranic, it's not pre-scientific. It is science at its most accurate, descriptive state. And I say that because it speaks in a language that not some arcane group of scientists can understand, but it is open for everyone to understand. Adam alayhi salam is created as a Khalifa. And there are different stories that the Mufassirin relate. Iblis, Imam al-Qurtubi says that he was an angel, that he was in the highest gathering. Other of the Mufassirin say that he was not, that he was from the jinn, but he was allowed in to the angelic realm. But the point is that Iblis was a knower. He knew Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He had tawheed. And he was worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he was actually sent to the earth to subdue, according to Imam al-Razi, to subdue a rebellion of the jinn on the earth. He came back and he was told that Allah is placing a Khalifa in the earth. This was Adam alayhi salam. And he was told, when the angels were brought forth in the presence of Adam alayhi salam, they were told to bow down to Adam. And they bowed down. They went into prostration, sajadu. Now this is not shirk. The angels do not commit shirk. They were not bowing down in worship. This is called sajda to tishrif. It's a sajda of honoring, and it was something that was done in the pre-Islamic times. The Prophet ﷺ abrogated it. His sharia prohibited it, and he did not allow it. A man may sajda to him, and he prohibited. He didn't say you're a mushrik. He knew what he was doing. He was honoring him because the man had tawheed. He was a student of the Prophet ﷺ. He studied and the first thing the Prophet ﷺ taught was La ilaha illallah. He didn't teach anything before that. That was the first message of our Prophet ﷺ, La ilaha illallah. And if you understand that, you cannot. If you understand that correctly, you cannot commit shirk. That is what removes a person from the boundaries of the mushrikeen. So they were commanded to bow down, not as mushrikeen, but commanded by Allah to honor Adam in that way. All of them bowed down immediately. And we know there's a discourse that took place before this when Allah told them that He was inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa. It was not they were not opposing Allah's wisdom in placing a Khalifa. They were attempting to understand because of what they'd previously seen done by the jinn on the earth. They were making an analogy that these people will do the same. And Allah said, I know what you don't know. All of them bowed down except Iblis. Istakbar. Iblis was arrogant. Now if you look, what is the illness there? What is the disease? The fundamental disease is envy. This is the disease of Iblis. It's envy. Now, I want to look at a very interesting explanation. This was written by a Danish man. Envy is concealed admiration. An admirer who senses that devotion cannot make him happy will choose to become envious of that which he admires. He will speak a different language, and in this language he will now declare that which he really admires is a thing of no consequence. Something foolish, illusory, perverse, and high-flown. Admiration is happy self-abandon. Envy, unhappy self-assertion. I think it's a very profound definition of envy, because what he's saying there, you see, Iblis knows this is a creation of Allah, and Iblis knows Iblis knows Allah. Allah doesn't make sense. مَا خَلَقْتُ هَذَا بَاطِلًا. Allah, مَا خَلَقْتَ هَذَا بَاطِلًا. You did not create this in vain. This is not vanity. This is not some foolish thing. Allah did not create Adam as some foolish creation. And Iblis knows this. But Iblis thinks that in admiring Adam alayhi salam, he will not be happy. He will not be happy. In fact, he becomes angry because he's envious. Hasad is the disease of Iblis. He is envious. And he says, you created him from mud. I'm created from fire, from air and fire. I'm superior to him. This is saying he's a thing of no consequence. I'm a thing of importance. Why are you having them bow down to him and not to me? This is very important, and inshallah I want to return to this, especially with Qarun. Now, at that point, Iblis is cast out from the inner circle, from the mela. And Iblis is told, he says, give me time, give me respite. You see, give me respite. And then he tells Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he makes an oath, in the same way that you led me astray, just as you have led me astray, بِمَا أَغْوَيْتَنِي. He blames his ghawaya on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He blames his going astray. And this is the nature of the envious one. He blames the other. And this is important when I get back to understanding the present condition of the Muslims. He blames the other. And he says, you did this to me. And then he says, لَغْوِيَنُّهُمْ أَجْمَعِينَ. So now, this is how foolish Iblis is. You led me astray, and now I'm going to lead them astray. You see, spite. And he promises to do that. إِلَّا عِبَادِكَ الْمُخْلَصِينَ, except those of ikhlas, the people of ikhlas, and not mukhlisin. Mukhlasin is a passive form, people of ikhlas with tawfiq from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he says, he promises Allah, you won't find them giving thanks, shukr. He promises. He doesn't want them to give thanks. So in Iblis we have two very important qualities. One is ingratitude. He's an ingrate. And the other is envy. He's envious. So this is important in understanding our past, because this relates very profoundly to the human condition and to fundamental causes for strife and grief within the human circumstances that we find ourselves in. Now, at the other spectrum, this is a more negative in terms of unseen influences. There are other unseen influences. So you have shaitan as an unseen factor in the human situation. You have other factors involved here. One, and the most primary, is the fact of revelation. The fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen out of His bounty to send human beings to communicate Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's intentions to His creation. Now if you look at this, it's very important to understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in His intentions to His creation, what He is telling, what His irada is for His creation, where His rida, His contentment lies, He sends human beings, not angels, human beings. And He sends them amongst the people. And He sends them with the language that they understand. There are people that eat. There are people that sleep. There are people that have human needs. They are not from the angelic realm. They are human beings. And Allah has sent them continuously since the beginning of the human condition until the last one was sent over 1400 years ago, who is our Prophet ﷺ, and we have the honor of being from his community. So revelation here is guidance from Allah. There is an unseen factor which is misguiding creation, and there is an unseen factor which is creating or bringing into existence guidance for the human condition. So you have both of these factors. You have an unseen element that is misguiding, and you have an unseen element that is guiding. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promises us and tells us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who guides whom He pleases, and He leads astray whom He pleases. In other words, we are not dualists or Manichaeists. Like previous traditions, we do not believe in the God of darkness, Ahura Mazda and Ahriman. We're not like the Majus. We're not like the dualists who believe in two opposing gods. No, we believe in the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, khayrihi wa sharrihi, hulwihi wa murrihi. It's good and it's bad. It's abundance and it's want. It's sweetness and it's bitterness. And shaitan is from the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is why our tawheed is so essential to understanding this situation. Now, you have some other unseen factors there. You have the angelic realm, which is it's part of the realm of guidance, there is an element that is related to revelation, but you have an angelic realm. In this room there are angels. These are real entities. They exist. This is not imagination. It is not mythology. They are real and they are present and with us. We have guardian angels, al-hafadha. We have a guardian angel before us and behind us, according to the Quran. We have an angel on the right and on the left. One is responsible for writing the hasanat, and the other is responsible for writing the sayyat, the good and the bad. And the one who writes the bad is under the charge of the one who writes the good. He cannot write the good until he takes permission. He cannot write the bad until he takes permission. And the angel who writes the good tells him to wait to see if the man makes tawbah during a certain period of time. So this is real. There are khawatir malakiyah. There are angelic inspirations that come to the human being. Just as there are khawatir shaitaniyah, nafsiyah, from the nafs, from shaitan. There are also suggestions that come from the angelic realm, and these are having an influence on the human being. And depending on the purity of the human being, is the greater the influence is. The more pure an individual comes, the more strong the angelic influence is on that individual. And it moves into the realm of hifz. Not the isma, because the isma is for the prophets alone. They have impeccability, they cannot fall into error, but there is a type of protection as an individual moves higher and higher into that realm of purity of the self. Now, if you move, and I could go, but the time is limited, if you move to, you can go into nafs, hawa, dunya, shaitan, the enemies of the human being. But I want to go a little bit into the material world now. Looking at we have to understand that that's there, and it's important because we're not materialists. You see, the materialists, if you read Montgomery Watts, who's a Christian, he should know better, but he doesn't. Montgomery Watts, in a book he wrote on Spain, he says, and when these Muslim hordes came over, he might not use that word, but when these Muslims came over, their main goal, and I'm paraphrasing, their main goal was conquest. You see, and they wanted booty. Now, were you there, Mr. Watts? No, seriously. Did you know the intentions of all of those people? Or are you simply making an analogy of the people that you know? Or maybe your own self? You see, this is how the materialist interprets it. And the munafiq is similar to that. When Abu Dharr al-Ghifari radiallahu anhu and Abdurrahman bin Auf brought in, one brought gold for the ghazwa and the other brought dates. The munafiqun said, Abdurrahman yura'i, he wants to show off. And they said about Abu Dharr, he wants to be mentioned. This is a disease in the heart. You see, in other words, they are projecting their own diseased hearts onto pure human beings whose intentions were Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger. They were not diseased people. By the shahada of the Prophet himself sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they were not diseased. But they are being considered as having these ulterior motives axes to grind, because those very people with those motives are projecting their own internal reality onto the internal reality of these other people, and it's not applicable. Because we do not have that. أُمِرْتُ أَنْ أَحْكُمْ بِالظَّوَاهِرِ. I was commanded to judge by the outward. أَشَقَقْتَ عَنْ قَلْبِهِ. Did you split open his heart and look into it? When Usama killed the man who said, La ilaha illallah, and he said, قَدْ نَافَقَ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ. He was doing it out of hypocrisy. أَشَقَقْتَ عَنْ قَلْبِهِ. Did you split open his heart and look into it? And in another riwayah, he kept repeating to him, and he said, La ilaha illallah, until Usama said, I wish that I hadn't became a Muslim until that day. You see, and so this is how the Prophet ﷺ was teaching his people, that intentions are Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's alone. Now we can see signs of a munafiq. We can see signs of a munafiq. You see, Allah has given us signs of hypocrites. They have signs. But to judge a person is a very dangerous thing to do, to judge their intentions. And this is what the materialist does. So we have to recognize these other forces, these other realities that the materialist will not look at, because he only knows the outward of this world. Now, when we move to the material, we have to keep the spiritual in mind. But when we move to the material, we also have two forces working, external and internal. In other words, the material, there are causes that I'm not relating to the unseen world, but I'm relating to the seen world, but there are signs and there are also symptoms. And the symptoms we do not know unless they are articulated by the very people that are involved in the matter. So we do not know. Now, in looking at the material, we have two important things to look at. One is kufr itself. And the Prophet ﷺ has said, Al-kufr millatun wahida. Kufr is one system. It is one millah. All of kufr is one millah. You have the Marxists, the atheists, the communists, the socialists, the national socialists, international socialists, the capitalists, the free market capitalists, the American anti-NAFTA, anti-GATS capitalists, all different types of capitalists, ultimately one phenomenon called kufr. It's all kufr. It goes under the rubric of kufr, but it has different permutations. And you can see syphilis, very interesting disease. One of the doyens of medicine in the 19th century said, no syphilis in all of its manifestations, and you've mastered 80% of pathology. Because syphilis is called the great mimicker. And the syphilis can look like a lot of different diseases. And this is a syphilitic culture, right? Really, they had syphilis. They all, you know why they wear wigs, right? You see all these pictures of men in wigs. And what cultures had men wearing wigs? Their hair was all falling out. They had syphilis. Really, that's what happened. And then the scrofulas. You said they had syphilitic scrofulas, so they started wearing these high collars. Very uncomfortable to hide the syphilis. It was a very common disease in Europe. I'm not exaggerating this. It still is. It's just all gone underground in this culture. They call it AIDS now, right? I mean, AIDS if you look at AIDS and study AIDS, it looks exactly like syphilis in fast motion. Seriously. I mean, a physician will confirm that for me. They have AIDS dementia. The first thing, they break out in rashes, right? And then later on they go into dementia, which is tertiary syphilis. And interesting to note that community that AIDS began first showing up in, the first signs of it, homosexual community, was a community constantly exposed to syphilis and rectal gonorrhea. So in fact, you can see the statistics of the public health in the Bay Area. It's very, very disgusting. It's all part of their culture. So you have the point I'm using about syphilis as a grotesque example, but syphilis mimics a lot of different things. It can look very different. It's still syphilis. And the same is true with what Nietzsche called civilization, right? It looks very different, but ultimately it's kufr. So the Eastern Bloc looks different from the Western Bloc. It's still kufr. Now, if we study kufr, and it's an important study because Allah spends a good deal, tells us, not stuff that Allah does not spend, but tells us in the Quran, much of the Quran is in explaining kufr so that we can understand it. Now, if you look at kufr, the European kufr is very different from other kufrs in that the Europeans have a deep agitation for centuries. And that agitation, Allah Ta'ala alam, relates to the fact that they had partial truths mixed with a lot of pseudo-truth, things that appear to be true. Their religion was tainted from very early on. Their books were altered from very early on. Now, if you look at the Christian text, the very first Christians were called Nazarenes by their own testimony. They're called, according to the Quran, Nasara. Now, they're finally realizing, and they actually realized all this in the 19th century, but now they're starting to sell books about it in places like Barnes & Noble after nobody can read, right? See, that's now they can just, you can go get all the information about what they're doing, about their kufr, everything. You can go get it now because nobody's going to read it. Because they're all watching TV. So it works. They can tell us the whole story. If you look at a book that Hans Kuhn did called Christianity and the World Religions, Kuhn writes, admittingly, current research would indicate that any direct dependency of Islam upon Jewish Christianity, and you see they're admitting there was something called Jewish Christianity, and that was the first Christianity of whatever sort, because there were various types even early on, will continue to be disputed for a while. In other words, we're trying to find the direct dependency. So it's in dispute right now because they have absolutely not one shred of evidence. But they do not, and I'll get to the reason why he has to say this, because it's a very important point he's making. We simply know too little about the Arabian Peninsula in those centuries before the Prophet Muhammad. That's rubbish. It is not true. But the analogies are as astonishing as ever. In other words, between Islam and original Christianity, because we believe that it was Islam. This is what he's telling us. And this is very important because this man is one of the dominant theologians of this age for the Christians, even though he's basically excommunicated by the Catholic Church because he's just telling the truth, and the truth destroys the foundations of the Catholic Church. It's a big problem. Even if we could never scientifically verify a genetic connection, the traditional historical parallels are escapable. What does he mean by a genetic connection? A materialistic connection. We don't believe it's revelation. Christian again, shame on you. You're supposed to believe in revelation. But he can't because he'll have to become Muslim. So we have to find a genetic material link. And how can we explain why Muhammad, although he rejected orthodox Christology, nonetheless always spoke sympathetically of Jesus as the great messenger, indeed as the Messiah who brought the gospel. In his theology and history of Jewish Christianity, Hans Joachim Schob's taking up the research of Harnack and Schlattler and completing it with the studies by Clement and Adre and Schaeder, comes to the following broadly substantiated conclusion, quote, though it may not be possible to establish exact proof of the connection, the indirect dependence, and they mean by indirect is we don't have any evidence. The indirect dependence of Muhammad ﷺ on sectarian Jewish Christianity is beyond any doubt. In other words, we can see it very clear that the Quran is articulating the Christianity that our own historical research is coming to realize was the original Christianity, and that is the Christianity that the Quran is saying is the Christianity that the Muslims believe in. This leaves us with a paradox of truly world historical dimensions. And when kuffar use the word paradox, it means we can't explain it materialistically. The fact that while Jewish Christianity in the church came to grief, in other words, it disappears, it was preserved in Islam, and with regard to some of its driving impulse, at least it has lasted till our own time. End quote. Hans Kuhn, Christianity and World Religions, Doubleday, New York, 1985, page 124. For anybody who could write that fast. So there you have it. The Christians have done their own research. They did it in the 19th century. They realized that their religion was a false religion. But there was an original Christianity. They called the original gospel Q. It's what the Germans entitled it, which in the Quran is called Injil. See, we know what it was called. They call it Q to mean the original, the quell, the source gospel. We know that it's the Injil. Now, they can no longer believe in the Christianity that they have if they're intellectuals. The people that believe in it are Methodists, Baptists, Pentecostals, and a whole generic other group of generic, what they call fundamentalists, right? Who are people that will only read the Bible because they say this is all the devil's handicraft. And it's very interesting that our scholars we have to, by obligation in Islam, read the Kufar. The scholars, there's a Fard Kifaya, which is Radd al-Shubuhat, which necessitates that our scholars look at what they are saying against Islam and refute it and show that it's false. They can't do this. They can't refute any of this historical research. They say it's the devil. And they're all devils just pointing fingers at each other in the end of the day. But, I mean, that's what they do. So the Christians have this problem, and it lasts for centuries, and they split. And what really the split, interestingly enough, as most of us already know, comes with